Look, I mean this in the nicest and most respectful way possible, but James Cameron is ruining his legacy. If you've been out of the loop, there has been a significant amount of backlash surrounding the recent 4K Blu-ray restorations of some iconic James Cameron films like Terminator, Aliens, The Abyss, and True Lies. While The Abyss has received mild criticism, most of the issues are centered around just CGI updates. True Lies has faced a ton of scrutiny. Many feel like the restoration is overprocessed. Faces look like they're painted over with AI, and Aliens is also receiving a very similar complaint. Not to mention, the Terminator and Terminator 2 have been just butchered. The color grades have also been changed from their original film stock to this weird digital cyan, like it looks too modern. There's this general complaint from people, myself included, that Cameron outright removed the film grain from the image, which makes it look very bizarre and glossy. It's actually ironic because on my first feature film, it was shot on digital cameras, and I actually put film grain over it to give it more of that old vintage filmy look. Now it's like that's not cool anymore, so now we gotta go back to the days of get rid of grain. It's so weird to me because film grain means that it looks like it was shot on film, and it's almost like Cameron doesn't want that. With Cameron's recent restoration efforts, it makes actors that we all know and love look like they border on being something from the uncanny valley. A lot of people have been claiming that AI is being used to upscale these movies, and yeah, they're using AI. I've already made a massive video going over AI in film and TV, so go and check that out if you haven't seen it already. But basically, using AI to restore old movies just gives me a really weird feeling. It reminds me of the George Lucas special editions for the Star Wars series and also THX 1138. Obviously, it's not exactly the same thing. Those movies had actual artists working on the CGI, but for the sake of film preservation, it feels very gross and destructive to the medium because it tries to remove the little imperfections that make the film feel like a real movie. The issue of grain removal has been a hot topic for film fans for years. Grain is a natural part of film stock, a textured result of the photochemical process that gives movies that were shot on film a very distinct aesthetic. For many, this grain is an essential part of the film's visual identity. I am one of those people that believes that. Terminator, the first one from 1984, has this very grainy, low-budget feel, but that's what makes it work so well. It feels very rough around the edges, and it just adds to the film's identity. When you remove that, it's not the same movie. It's actually worse off. Removing grain or smoothing it with AI, as Cameron has chosen to do, erases a very significant piece of the movie's original character. For the video game fans, it would be like if you took Skate 3 and removed all the glitches. It's like that's what makes it fun. Going back to Cameron, the artificial smoothing often results in these unnatural visuals where the fine details are actually blurred and it makes actors' faces look waxy and plastic. For collectors of physical media, like me, people that collect Blu-rays and 4K UHD discs, faithful restoration is everything. This audience, we aren't looking for artificial enhancements that make the film feel less like its original version and like it's 60 frames per second remastered for the PS5. Like, we don't want that. The grain is a good deal of the very foundation of the filmmaking techniques of the time, and it's a mark of history. By opting to modernize with AI, Cameron isn't just remastering them, he's revising them in ways that make the originals feel unrecognizable. It borders on revisionism, and this risks tarnishing the legacy of what made these movies groundbreaking in the first place. In response to these concerns, very valid concerns, Cameron had this to say in an interview with The Hollywood Reporter. When people start reviewing your grain structure, they need to move out of mom's basement and meet somebody, right? I'm serious. I mean, are you fucking kidding me? I've got a great team that does the transfers. I do all the color and density work. I look at every shot, every frame, and then the final transfer is done by a guy who has been with me for years. All the Avatar films are done that way. Everything is done that way. Get a life, people. Seriously. Look, I understand that James Cameron has more money than God, and I'm just a broke college student, but insulting the physical media collector community is a serious financial misstep. I say this as someone who is not offended, because frankly I'm not. He can say this all he wants. But with the rise of streaming services, the market for physical media has contracted, and those who still buy physical discs in niche formats like 4K UHD are very passionate about preserving cinema's history. These collectors are some of the most loyal fans willing to spend a premium for well-crafted releases that stay true to the original vision of the filmmakers. For many, Cameron's decision to alter the grain of his classic films is seen as a betrayal of this trust, alienating the very audience that keeps physical media alive. Cameron's AI-driven alterations also raise questions about the role of the filmmaker in preserving the history of their own work. While it's true that some directors choose to revisit their films, Cameron's use of AI to smooth out his films feels pretty egregious because it seems to ignore the cinematic context in which these films were made. The grain in the Terminator, like I said, is part of that gritty sci-fi aesthetic. It reflects the limitations of a 1980s indie film that pushed the boundaries of low-budget filmmaking. Scrubbing that away with AI creates a sterile, lifeless version of a once iconic film. Rather than addressing the concerns about how the removal of grain impacts the visual integrity of his films, Cameron's response just deflects and mocks. Critics are worried that AI smoothing alters the original look and feel of these films, and these concerns deserve a thoughtful and respectful response. Instead, his reaction comes off as arrogant and condescending. The tone of his response is unprofessional and dismissive. While it's understandable to defend your own work, I get it, I'm a creator too, but using derogatory language and mocking the opinions of others is not a constructive way to engage with criticism. Not to mention the whole mom's basement thing is just so overdone. It's been said to death at this point. And like most of the people that care about this stuff are normal everyday people that just have a hobby. Like, really? A more measured and respectful approach would have been to explain his choices in the restoration process and discuss the benefits and limitations of AI technology. I understand getting frustrated by something like this, but it feels wrong to go after the people that are, or were, the primary consumers of your product. There's also this general tone that I get from these articles reporting on this. For example, this article from Vulture makes some really lame, snide remarks about how the only people who care about this are dorks, nerds, and losers. Again, I'm not offended by this. It's more just annoying how dismissive people are to the conversation of AI being used to mess with film preservation and film history. It comes off as someone who's uneducated about all this, feeling left out, so they need to be above the entire situation rather than take a stand. In short, James Cameron risks doing serious harm to his legacy by making these changes. The very audiences who cherish his films for their groundbreaking achievements and nostalgia are the ones who are likely angered by these AI restorations. Again, this isn't a call-out post to him, because he's not going to see this, but what I'm getting at is, I love James Cameron's films. I do. I truly adore them. They're a piece of my childhood and my current life with where I'm at right now. So this is coming from a place of love. Instead of trying to modernize his old works, Cameron should focus on preserving them for what they were and why they mattered to cinema in the first place. I don't want future generations to only have access to these weird, smoothed out AI versions of these iconic movies. Using AI to smooth out the grain in his older films is a misguided attempt to modernize them. By alienating collectors of physical media, the very people who still care about the art of film, he risks losing the goodwill of his most loyal fans. Film history should be preserved, not rewritten. Cameron should respect the integrity of his classic films and the audiences that love them. Otherwise, he may find himself remembered not as the director who pushed cinema forward, but as the one who erased his own legacy.